And welcome to the HB Toss. I'm your host, AJ Swiatek, joined by one of our co-hosts here, Tristan Fluhr. Tristan, I'm really excited to get into this one.
Yeah, AJ, it was a really interesting week of NFL action. Week 4 was a good one, and I'm so excited to talk about Week 5 because I think this has a lot of really good matchups. The NFL is in so much parity right now. There are a lot of teams that sit at 2-2. There's not really a team that's really pulled away in terms of clear favorites or clear bottom feeders. I really think it's going to be an interesting show.
You know, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. Week 4, very interesting. Before we pivot to Week 5, we'll get into segment number 1. Week 4 in 60 seconds, myself versus the clock. Without further ado, let's get underway. The week started with Miami falling to Cincinnati on Thursday night, but I think we know what the real story was there, Tristan. Tua Tagovailoa went down with that head injury. He will be out in Week 5 versus the Jets, one of our key games later. Really interesting there to see how the NFLPA and everyone shakes that one out. Then we went to London. The Vikings took on the Saints, and they knocked them down 28-5. The Lions, another high-scoring contest and another loss, 48-45. And really, I think the underrated storyline there, Geno Smith has looked, dare I say, elite this season. Through 4 games, he has been the highest-graded quarterback. He has looked absolutely phenomenal this season. Then the Titans went on into Indy, tried to knock off the Colts. They did so. Serious questions are starting to arise from Indianapolis fans. Not happy with Frank Reich. Some unhappy with Chris Ballard. And now 5 weeks into the season, a lot more questions than you expected from Indy. Then the Bills, they went into Baltimore, came back from down 20-3. Josh Allen's him. He walked away with that victory. And finally, the Packers went into New England. They tried to take down Bailey Zappi. What did they do? They did it. The Patriots, Bill Belichick, took them to overtime, but as time expired, the Packers walked away with the victory.
Well, I think it was a really interesting week, like I said in our open. You know, there's a lot of parity in the NFL. No team has really established themselves yet. I think it was Tom Brady earlier, either today or yesterday, that said that there's a lot of bad football being played in the NFL right now, and you can look and you can see that. There's no team that has really put themselves on the map as a team like, hey, we got to beat this team if we're going to be good this season. No team has really separated themselves. So I think it's really interesting in the fact that you're looking at all this together and as a week. You have so many teams that are 2-2 right now that all these matchups are going to be so hard to predict because it's such a time of just not sure on how these teams are going to shake out. There's been a lot of change in the offseason, and you're seeing a lot of that now. This is also the first season where COVID really hasn't been a concern. In the last 2 years in the NFL, you're also seeing the concerns of that. All this added together along with the injuries and all this kind of things, all these things that are all rising to the top together are making for one of the most interesting seasons and most compelling seasons I've seen in a very long time.
You know, Tristan, of course TB12 would say football's not being played at a high level. I would put it a different way. I think this is one of the most even starts to an NFL season we've seen. I wouldn't argue that it's been bad football, but rather that we have a pack that is much closer than we're used to. Sure, there's those few teams at the top, but this pack is moving all over, and that's where we get into our next section. The biggest risers and the biggest fallers from Week 4. Tristan, in terms of risers, I think there's no one who really showed more there than the Kansas City Chiefs.
I mean, what a performance they put up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 2 years ago, this was the Super Bowl, and now you're having the Kansas City Chiefs who went into Tampa and showed them who is boss. The Kansas City Chiefs had an incredible performance with Patrick Mahomes, who really this season has taken off to a new level that we even thought possible for Patrick Mahomes. And you're wondering the difference. You know, they lose Tyreek Hill in the offseason. You're wondering, how does this team take over? How do they jump? How do they fall? But really, I think it's all about the defense. Their front office has put a lot of focus on their defense. Their defensive coordinator, Steve Spagnuolo, one of the best in the NFL. They've put a lot of money and invested a lot into that defense. And Patrick Mahomes has not had to score as much as he has in the past in order for them to stay in games. And you're seeing that difference because he's able to use Travis Kelce more in the situation. They're able to get Clyde Edwards-Helaire involved in the running game. They're able to use all these different elements that the Kansas City Chiefs make them. And Andy Reid really has a pretty easy job managing this team with so many studs on the roster.
Tristan, you hit a couple really good points there. I think that what NFL fans really looked over heading into the season and why the Chiefs are skyrocketing up ESPN, SportsCenter, whatever you want to look at, they're going up all the power rankings this week, One, as you mentioned, Patrick Mahomes. He is on a different level. There is nobody in this league who's playing the same level as football as him. But two, as you also mentioned, that Kansas City defense was brutally underrated, not only heading into the season, but even just heading into this week. They looked really good against that Buccaneers team. The score doesn't show the full story. Some of those points were scored there at the very end. That Chiefs defense is very legit, Tristan.
Yeah, they are, and they've just put a purpose on getting after the quarterback. And against a banged-up Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive line, that was extremely important in that Tampa Bay game. And the secondary has been phenomenal so far for the Chiefs, and that's even with losing Tyrann Mathieu in the offseason. They've lost pieces of that Super Bowl secondary, but in the same way, they've added different pieces, and they've used it, and they've kind of done what Chris Ballard's strategy is in Indianapolis, where you try to grow the in-house talent. They've done it, but maybe at a little bit higher of a success rate, because the Chiefs right now are competing for Super Bowls year in and year out, and the Colts just haven't been able to put all the pieces together. So, I mean, I'm roasting my own team, but really at the end of the day, that's what happens in the NFL. You're going to have one team that really establishes themselves because they're able to develop their talent and they're able to spend money when they have to, and you have teams that draft well but are not able to do anything with their talent just because of different external factors.
And Tristan, I'm the biggest Chris Ballard fan in the world, don't get me wrong, but it's hard to be on the same level as the Kansas City Chiefs. That front office, everything ran so sound. You see their coordinators, you see everybody in this entire building getting interviewed for jobs all around the league every season. It seems like it's just a talent warehouse where people keep climbing up the ladder, keep getting better and better. And you know, I think that the only system that you could argue that does it better is our other biggest riser, the San Francisco 49ers. That Kyle Shanahan tree has now produced a multitude of NFL head coaches. That 49ers front office continually churning out new talent, and they played very well this week.
Absolutely. Just to tack on to that Kansas City point real quick, where did Chris Ballard come from before he was in Indianapolis? Kansas City. But talking about the San Francisco 49ers, I think everyone, if you're a fan of the 49ers in the Bay Area, you think that your season's over when Trey Lance goes down with an injury. But I stand by this point, and I will stand on this hill, that Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the better NFL quarterbacks in terms of winning. I know wins aren't a quarterback stat, and I don't view them as a quarterback stat. But if you want your football team to win and you want them to be successful, the best game manager, I believe, currently in the NFL is Jimmy Garoppolo. The guy consistently wins. That is what he does. He's had his team in the NFC Championship game 2 of the last 3 years. The year it wasn't was because he was hurt for most of the season, and there were a ton of injuries on that 49ers team. Jimmy G is a winner. Kyle Shanahan's system is a winner, and really all he has to do is dump it off to Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, and good things happen for the San Francisco 49ers, and that defense is just phenomenal.
Tristan, you hit the nail on the head again. You know, 49ers fans, the season felt like it was over. Your number 3 overall pick, Trey Lance, out for the season. Jimmy Garoppolo has to come out, and it felt like the Bay Area really just kicked the can, kicked him to the side, if you will. Jimmy Garoppolo was an afterthought. He comes in, and as you mentioned, he is just a winner. And you know what? I think a lot of that does come from Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan's system values so much being able to just throw the ball, hit those RPOs, make those quick reads. And in terms of processing an NFL defense, in terms of being able to hit the guy when they're open, as you mentioned, there is very few men in this world who do that better than Jimmy Garoppolo. He reads the defense, he gets to the line, he barks all of his adjustments, he adjusts the offensive line and his receivers at the line of scrimmage. That's not something many NFL quarterbacks do. Kyle Shanahan trusts his guy, and honestly, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but it even feels like the playbook has opened even more for Jimmy G than it did for Trey Lance, where it felt like some of those plays, those power runs, Kyle Shanahan maybe not used to calling them, and all of a sudden he's back to his bread and butter, he's back to Jimmy Garoppolo, and the 49ers are back to winning football games.
No doubt, and I think the quarterback that you look at historically in the NFL that reminds me most of Jimmy Garoppolo is actually a former 49ers quarterback, and Alex Smith. They're both great processors. They're both winners. They're both what you would call a game manager in the fact, I mean, obviously as a quarterback, that's your job to manage the game. But these two are especially good at it. They don't have anything else that really stands out, but they're good at a lot of things. They're very much a jack of all trades. Alex Smith was a guy that took the 49ers to the NFC Championship game. He's a guy that during the season where he got hurt and Colin Kaepernick stuck in, had him in a position to get to the Super Bowl. So Alex Smith has the same kind of career path as Jimmy Garoppolo had. Jimmy Garoppolo also reminds me of his Eastern Illinois counterpart, Tony Romo, in the same way that they're able to process and manage the game. Obviously, Romo didn't have the postseason success that Garoppolo or Alex Smith has had, but in the regular season, very comparable.
And with the way that the NFL is moving, everyone wants to have that quarterback that's going to win you football games. Does Jimmy Garoppolo do that? Not necessarily, but when you have the head coach of Kyle Shanahan, he's able to make that happen. Now we're going to head to teams that are moving down, and maybe two teams, you could argue, one of them at least has a quarterback that can win them football games, and that's your defending Super Bowl champion, Los Angeles Rams.
They're just a puzzle, man. The whole thing about the Los Angeles Rams is confusing. It seems like Matthew Stafford has a target lock on Cooper Kupp and can't seem to find to throw anywhere else the football. Really, I think with the Rams, and I'm going to talk about this later in our game picks, but you really have to establish the running game. You've basically abandoned Darrell Henderson Jr. and Cam Akers in that running system, and really it's really closed down Sean McVay's playbook, where if you don't establish that run, you have to rely on the pass. And who's the receiver that's best at getting open on this team? Cooper Kupp. So he's the guy that you're going to throw to. Allen Robinson struggled in Chicago, struggled in Jacksonville in terms of getting open. You're seeing those same traits go here, where you're saying, hey, you have a big name in Allen Robinson, but if he can't get open and Matthew Stafford is not going to throw to him, then you have those issues in terms of only locking onto one guy. And Cooper Kupp was the Offensive Player of the Year last year for a reason, because he is a great wide receiver, and he is so good at getting open, and he creates that separation, and he's so good at running routes. But if your whole offense runs through one guy, most times it doesn't work.
And Tristan, this might be a little unbuttoned here. We didn't prepare this at all, but I like the point you made about how this Rams team may be taking a step in the wrong direction. I think that's something that NFL fans have really taken just their eyes off of for whatever reason. I think that comes down to the fact that Matthew Stafford, that entire team, they loved and really relied on Robert Woods. Robert Woods was a guy who Matthew Stafford would look to on third downs. Yes, Cooper Kupp had that Offensive Player of the Year season, and don't get me wrong, it was one of the great years from a wide receiver. But Allen Robinson comes in, and I don't want to say he's no Robert Woods, because I'm not saying these guys aren't even in the same tier, but he plays a different style than Robert Woods does. Robert Woods honestly plays closer to Cooper Kupp than he does to Allen Robinson.
Yeah.
And just putting an entire new guy in that offense, you could tell it's messing with McVay's mentals. It's also messing with Stafford, who's now forced to throw the ball to Tyler Higbee. Get this, Tyler Higbee has the most targets of any tight end in the NFL through this season. I mean, that's unacceptable. I love Tyler Higbee as much as the next guy. He's on my fantasy team, but he does not deserve to be getting targeted as much as he does. And I think that's because Stafford still hasn't built that connection with Robinson. And you've got to wonder, with Stafford, with McVay, with this connection with Robertson, it can't be too little too late with him, because the second that it gets to that point, this Rams team is now on the outside looking in. And, of course, only 4 weeks into the season, plenty can change, but this defending Super Bowl champion team has not looked themselves.
No, they haven't. And I think I really like the point you made about Robert Woods. The man they call Bobby Trees is great at separation. He's an unsung hero of a lot of teams that he's on. You can say the same thing right now with the Tennessee Titans. The guy can get open. He's a burner. He is just a solid, strong, reliable receiver. Where Cooper Kupp can make some of the flashier plays, Robert Woods is just there. He's a first down machine. If you throw the ball to him, he's more than likely going to get over the sticks and get you a first down, which is what Allen Robinson kind of lacks in some ways. He's more of a physical wide receiver, kind of like an Alshon Jeffrey type, where he's not going to necessarily burn you with his speed, burn you with his route running, but because of his sheer athleticism, he's going to beat you.
And Allen Robinson has showed in the past that when he puts it together, he can be that guy for this Los Angeles team. It's just going to come down to McVay scheming him in the right way, which I have no doubt that Sean McVay, of all people, can do. But also Matthew Stafford having trust in his guys and being able to deliver that ball quickly, because Stafford, believe it or not, has had a hard time getting the ball out quickly for the first time in his career this season. I think he's got really comfortable behind that Los Angeles line. They have a lot of things to clean up on the offensive end if this Rams team wants to get on the other side of this risers and fallers. We have one faller left. It's your hometown team. It is the hometown team, the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, I don't have answers right now for the Indianapolis Colts. Right now, Matt Ryan can't hold on to a football. It's like he dumps his hands into grease before he goes out and plays. Yeah, something like that. I mean, he's fumbling the football every other play, it seems. And that offensive line is really the problem in Indianapolis. They have good individual pieces, but they don't know how to play together. Also, losing Anthony Costanzo 2 years ago is a loss that is still being felt today. Eric Fisher, they tried out last year, didn't work. Trying Matt Pryor, who played guard for the last few years, doesn't work. They're also missing Mark Glowinski, who went to the Giants in the offseason. I think that's a bigger loss than people are thinking than not. You know, Danny Pinter's in there doing a solid job, Ball State alum. Shout out Danny Pinter, but really in terms of that offensive line, that's been the problem. Also, the wide receiver room is severely lacking talent. It's just Michael Pittman Jr. Your tight ends have been able to supplement in a lot of ways. I think you just need to get Jelani Woods the ball. When you give him the ball, good things happen, but he hasn't seen the field too much this year. Now Jonathan Taylor's injured, which was the lifeblood of the offense. Now you have to go to Nyheim Hines. Not a bad backup running back option by any stretch of the imagination. And you also have Phillip Lindsay, who seems like a guy who's just a very solid running back. If you need downs, if you need somebody to eat up plays, to open up that passing game, Phillip Lindsay is going to be your guy. But in terms of the defense, going to the other side of the ball, you lose Matt Eberflus to the Chicago Bears, now their head coach, who was their defensive coordinator for the past few years, run a very good defense, one of the best in the NFL. Shaq Leonard's been out for a few games this year. Gus Bradley now, the defensive coordinator, and they're running such a soft zone that it seems like the Colts just haven't been able to figure that system out. Xavier Rhodes, who was very good last year after being left for dead by the Vikings, hasn't shown up this year. Brandon Faison, who is the corner they picked up from the Raiders in the offseason, a guy who followed Gus Bradley to Indianapolis, hasn't been there. Isaiah Rodgers, who may be the Colts' best corner right now, hasn't shown up so far this season because he's been on the bench. And then Kenny Moore, a guy who they gave tons of money to in the offseason, and a Pro Bowler, has been almost non-existent in the nickel cornerback position. So this defense and this team really just has so many issues that they need to solve, and patience is running thin in Indianapolis. Irsay, inside the office, has said that there will be major changes in the front office and coaching staff if things don't turn around sooner rather than later, and we all know that Jim Irsay is not a patient man and wants his football team to win.
Can you all tell that this guy is a passionate Indianapolis Colts fan or what? He is just the picture of what Colts fans are feeling right now. They're calling for Frank Reich to be fired. They're calling for a new general manager in Chris Ballard, albeit I don't necessarily agree with the second part of that statement.
I would say to that statement that it's not necessarily true that they need to be fired. I think that Frank Reich can be a very successful NFL coach. He just needs to open up his playbook more. You can tell when Frank Reich schemes for games versus when he doesn't. When we're against good opponents, like the Kansas City Chiefs, for example, he schemes his plays. And you can tell because a lot of games in the AFC South and games that we should win or games against teams that we're expected to win, we don't scheme very much. And that's the problem with the Colts. You can tell when we're being out-schemed and out-coached. Now, the general manager position is a completely different thing. Chris Ballard is one of the best drafters I've seen in a very long time, bringing in constantly good talent. But in terms of free agency, he's been unwilling to spend the money. He spent some money on Carson Wentz to go out and go trade for him. Look where that went. And I honestly don't think Carson Wentz was the problem last year. Carson Wentz was the scapegoat for all the issues of the Indianapolis Colts last year. I don't think that's necessarily true because you're seeing a lot of the same things happen with Matt Ryan this year, or at least what's left of Matt Ryan this year. Because I think when it comes to free agency, the Colts have one of the most friendly budgets in the NFL, one of the most cap spaces in the NFL, and they've been unwilling to use it.
Tristan, the Colts have a lot of issues. On the offensive end and the defensive end, what I look for from Frank Reich, I have to disagree with you. I think that he is one of the better second-half coaches in this NFL, but every single game so far this season, this team has come out flat. They've come out unprepared. And sure, Frank Reich has shown flashes, but that doesn't cut it in today's NFL anymore. There's so many bright, young-minded NFL OCs who are ready to take that next step. This Colts team, I think that they're really a couple more losses away from saying, okay, it's time for a complete teardown. They've got a couple pieces in place. You mentioned Michael Pittman Jr., you mentioned Leonard, you mentioned Nelson. All three of those guys are going to be cornerstones of this franchise.
JT?
I didn't even mention Jonathan Taylor. This team has young pieces in place that can be there, and I think the seats are getting warmer for both Ballard and Reich, and I think if this ship doesn't go in the right direction here in the next couple of weeks, this Colts team could be seeing people fired, could be seeing guys like Sam Ehlinger potentially getting snaps, because I think that we're getting closer and closer to a time in Indianapolis where a complete teardown happens, and if they continue on this end of the rising and falling stick, that may happen.
I think at this point, Frank Reich has like a butane torch underneath his seat, but you see what happens, and who knows? The NFL is a strange place.
It certainly is. And crazier things have happened than a team turning their season around after 4 weeks. This Colts team still has a win to their name, but I mean, for a team that was supposed to be front-running, potentially competing for this AFC South, to be down to both the Jaguars and the Titans, who, don't get me wrong, have played good in their own rights this season.
Jags are a good football team.
It's still disappointing, to say the least. And that was risers and fallers, Tristan. I like what we got to get out of the way there. But now we're going to send it down to Madison Surface, a senior in SportsLink who is currently with Jayshon Jackson to talk about some of his NFL takes.
All right, here with Jayshon Jackson. Jayshon, what is your favorite NFL team?
I got to go hometown, Chicago Bears.
Chicago Bears. Is there somebody on that team you've been modeling your game after?
I would say Darnell Mooney is probably the closest person that I kind of pretty much model my game after.
All right, and what have you taken from him to model your game?
Just the way he uses different tempos in his routes. I think that is something that is very effective and works for him.
All right, thank you so much, Jayshon. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Madison. And after hearing from Jayshon Jackson, Madison Surface, we're going to go to our next segment, 4 picks for Week 5 of the NFL season. Tristan, I want to start with one. You got to talk about your favorite team a little bit. Let's talk about mine. The Dolphins heading to East Rutherford, New Jersey to play my New York Jets.
Well, I think this is a very interesting matchup. I think a lot of people are going to immediately think Jets because Tua Tagovailoa is out this week due to the concussions he's had the last few weeks. But really, I'm still going with the Dolphins in this one. I think that Teddy Bridgewater is one of the best backup quarterbacks you can have. He has Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle to throw to. The Dolphins are the only team in the NFL that has 2 receivers in the top 10 in NFL receiving yards. Tyreek Hill is number 1, Jalen Waddle number 6. It's going to be a test for the Jets secondary, who is young, solid, number 15 in passing yards in the league. But I think this will be the biggest test for Sauce Gardner in his young rookie campaign so far.
Tristan, you took the words out of my mouth with Sauce Gardner. I think this is a huge matchup to see who is going to outplay the other. Sauce Gardner, currently on Daniel Jeremiah's updated list of top rookies so far this season, he sits at the top. Number 1 is Sauce Gardner. DJ Reed, other Jets cornerback, has been playing at an all-pro level this season. I mean, you could argue that he has been the best cornerback in the NFL thus far. As for the Jets, as you mentioned, a lot of people are going to turn and say, I want New York in this one. And I'm going to be one of those people. Zach Wilson comes back in the 4th quarter, drives down the field, goes 10 for 12 with 128 passing yards, takes his team down for the game-winning score. He showed promise, but most importantly for me, Zach Wilson's always had that promise. He showed a different kind of poise than we saw in that freshman season. He was able to stand in the pocket, take some hits. That knee looked completely fine, Tristan. And I've got to say, at home, in front of the fans, the Jets are currently 2-0 on the road this season, 0-2 at home. I think this is their time to get back on track at MetLife Stadium. Zach Wilson's going to take this team to a double-digit victory. Mark it down.
That's a bold prediction.
Yes, it is, and who else would it come from but me? Let's be honest.
Fair point.
Here. We'll head to our next game. Eagles going to Arizona to take on the Cardinals. Tristan, I learned my lesson from picking against the Eagles last week. I want to hear what you have to say.
I'm staying with Philadelphia. You know, I think they improve to 5-0. Jalen Hurts is running a juggernaut of an offense so far this year. They're number 8 in overall passing yards. They're number 5 in rushing yards. They're getting Miles Sanders going. He didn't have a single touchdown last year, which is a wild stat in its own, but they got him involved last week with a touchdown of his own. And, you know, with Jalen Hurts, he has so many options to throw to now. He has A.J. Brown, he has Quez Watkins, and he has Devonta Smith. So really, I think that Eagles offense is looking very good. The Cardinals have been a hot and cold team this year. They got very lucky with a win against the Raiders in overtime. If Hunter Renfrow doesn't cough up the football in OT in that game, I think the Raiders go on to win that one, and then they go in and beat the pit of dysfunction that is the Carolina Panthers. So really, I think the Cardinals are a team that's hot and cold, and I think the Eagles take advantage of that.
Tristan, I very much agree with what you said there. The Cardinals have yet to put up an impressive win for me. That one against the Raiders felt like it should have gone the other way. And as you mentioned, Baker Mayfield, this Panthers team, Baker Mayfield is now graded as the worst quarterback in football for 3 consecutive weeks. He has not looked the part in Carolina. I love Baker as much as the next guy, the 2018 first overall pick, but he just has not looked the part. This Cardinals team has yet to pick apart a team. They are clearly missing DeAndre Hopkins. Marquise Brown has been good. You could even argue that he's been great, but he is not enough to run an entire offense. and neither is Cliff Kingsbury. His play calling has definitely taken a step up from last season, where some fans were even calling for him to be fired. But really, I look at these two rosters, Philadelphia, Arizona. When I was doing the rundown before coming on air, Tristan, I only see one advantage for the Cardinals, and that's that they're at home. This Philadelphia Eagles team has no hole on paper. From both sides of the trenches, to the skill position players, to even the quarterback at this point, I think you could make a very solid argument that this Philadelphia Eagles team is better at every single spot than not only the Cardinals, but the majority of teams in this NFC. They're going to front run. They are the favorites to make the Super Bowl from the conference, and from good reason. I think that this Eagles team not only beats Arizona this week, but this is one of the tougher teams on their schedule for the next 5 weeks. I think this Philadelphia team could start off so hot. I picked against them last week against the Jaguars. I learned my lesson. I think this Eagles team could start off as good as 10-0 looking at that schedule.
And that's another bold prediction. We're only 5 weeks through the season.
I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it's possible. They're favorites in all those games. Who knows? But something that I am calling another bold take on, who do you think's going to win? Cowboys traveling to Los Angeles. They'll take on the Rams.
Before I make my pick, I'm going to say this. As a Dak Prescott supporter and someone who has been for a very long time, Cooper Rush has been nothing short of impressive since coming in for Dak Prescott. But I think the Rams finally get back on track at this one. Like I said in our Risers and Fallers segment, I really think that the Rams need to establish their run game. I think you establish Cam Akers. I think you establish Darrell Henderson. The Cowboys have one of the worst rush defenses in the NFL. Really, their only player that really is notable in that defensive front seven is Micah Parsons, who's been used mostly as a pass rusher this year. Already has 4 sacks in the season, but that Rams offensive line has been solid. So really, I give the advantage to the Los Angeles Rams. I think they get win number 3 on the season.
The Rams shot me in the foot last week when I picked him over the 49ers. Maybe a little sour taste in my mouth, but maybe a little hype on the Cooper Rush train that's all but left the station. He has 4 touchdowns to no interceptions so far this season. The Cowboys, sure, Cooper Rush gets a lot of credit as he deserves, but this is one of the best defenses in the NFL. Micah Parsons, Trayvon Diggs, they've both looked the part this season. They're legit. That's one of the best front sevens that I've seen in recent memory. Give me the boys. You know what? The Dallas Cowboys heading to Los Angeles, knock off the Super Bowl defending Rams. They raise more questions about Cooper Rush, albeit maybe not warranted, but they raise even more questions from LA fans as if this Rams team picks up a losing record here to start the season, 5 weeks in. I think that there is some serious questions going on in the Bay Area. 1 game left. We've disagreed twice so far. We'll see if we agree on this one. The Bengals, Cincinnati, heading into Baltimore to take on the Ravens.
First of all, I think this game has potential to be the game of the week. This is going to be a barn burner. 2 teams that do not play defense, at least they haven't so far this year. The Bengals have the best pass offense, one of the best pass offenses in the NFL, and the Ravens have the very last pass defense in the entire National Football League, a team that has been so focused on defense for so many years. It's the offense that has really established themselves so far this year. Lamar Jackson has been an MVP candidate so far this season, 11 touchdowns to only 4 picks. Lamar Jackson is the guy that you're running this whole offense through. J.K. Dobbins, who had a terrible injury last year, came back 2 weeks ago. Last week had his best game in a very long time with a touchdown. I really think that the Ravens, after two losses against 2 of the best teams in the NFL, and the Dolphins and the Bills, I think they get back on track this week against a very good Cincinnati Bengals team. I think the Ravens take this one in an absolute thriller.
2 quarterbacks who coming into the year were really considered MVP frontrunners. Both still the case. Joe Burrow starting to look like himself again, and as for Lamar Jackson, he's looked like even more than himself. He has been an absolute monster out there. He's been on a tear both passing and running the football, and as we talk about running, you mentioned J.K. Dobbins. He came back. He put up 2 touchdowns last week. Not 1, but 2. J.K. Dobbins has looked the part for the Ravens, albeit in just 1 game. He came back. He looked phenomenal for the Ravens last week. I think Lamar Jackson continues to play that backyard football, if you will. Ravens take this one. It's a home game in the AFC North. That's really hard to do on the road. All respect to Joey B. The Bengals have been in all 4 games this season, but I think Lamar Jackson gets it done. Great show. Final segment. Fantasy football starts and sits. Fantasy football has really become such an integral part of the game. The players play it, the fans play it. Tristan, we're going to give them a little insight. Who's someone that you are looking to start in all of your fantasy lineups this week?
Well, the one person I'm looking for, at least for me personally, is Jared Goff. Now, I don't have him on my team, and I'm very jealous I have him on my team. Would have never guessed I would be saying that at the beginning of this season. But really, if you're looking at the top quarterbacks in the NFL in terms of touchdowns, Jared Goff is number one, tied with Lamar and Patrick Mahomes. What a stat is that? And really, that's because the Lions' defense has been so bad this year, historically bad, that Jared Goff has had no other choice but to score to keep them into games. He has Amon-Ra St. Brown, who he could be getting back this week. We haven't heard the injury report on him quite yet. DeAndre Swift is out, which means they're going to be more of a focus on the passing game. So really, I think it's a win-win for Lions fans and for Jared Goff fantasy owners. I think he is a definite start this week.
The Lions so far, highest scoring offense, also the defense that's let up the most points in the league. They've scored 140 points, let up 141. Jared Goff has been a major part of that. He's got himself into a lot of shootouts. And I know, as you mentioned, going into the year, if you told me that we'd be sitting in these chairs and saying that to start Jared Goff this week, I'd probably bat an eye at it, to be honest with you. But Jared Goff, as you mentioned, 11 touchdowns heading into Week 5. That's an elite number in terms of fantasy. And although he may not be the long-term answer in Detroit, for fantasy football, it's a different game, especially if you're playing redraft. I agree to look to Jared Goff this week. For a starter of my own, Tristan, I'm going to go to Buffalo. I'm going to go to that game, and I'm going to look at Gabriel Davis.
Love it.
Starting to recover from that injury, Gabe Davis has had two, if you want to call them rough games in a row, but Sean McVay, Josh Allen, all of these guys around the league are just raving about the guy. He's a guy who you have to scheme for as a coordinator, and with Stephon Diggs there, I think that he just gets even more opportunities to get open. He's going to be matched up in a coverage that I really like for him. I think Gabriel Davis, he's got the targets. Last week he had 6 of them. I think that goes up even more, and I think he does more with the targets now that he's back to full speed. He's been a full participant in practice this week, and I think he needs to be a full participant in your fantasy lineup.
Yeah, and for my second start, I'm going with Miles Sanders, the running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. Sanders has been really kind of a fantasy snub the last few years just because last year he got 0 touchdowns, either rushing or passing, which is crazy in its own right. But really, I think this year, Miles Sanders has gotten on track. That Eagles offense has started to use him more at the goal line, which is great for Miles Sanders fantasy owners. He's going up against a Cardinals team that has allowed 23 points per game in terms of fantasy to running backs this year on opposing teams. I think all this leads for Miles Sanders to be a solid RB2 option, maybe even RB1 if you're in a pinch.
I think that this next start of mine may have the owners of this player a little bit surprised, but I'm going to tell you to start Terry McLaurin. Yes, he's coming off a bad week, just 2 catches for 15 yards, but he was targeted 6 times in that game, and I expect this Commanders team that's now dug themselves in a bit of a hole to just throw the ball more and more as the year goes by. Yes, Jahan Dotson has emerged in this offense, and he has already made himself a role. But this is still Terry's team. Scary Terry, I expect him to get on the board, maybe even find his way into the end zone, get back on track, get this Commanders team potentially back on track, that is, and really help your fantasy lineup this week. Tristan, one more start each.
And I like that pick of Terry McLaurin, but I really like my tight end that I am saying that you should start this week, and that's Zach Ertz. Tight end has been one of the most volatile positions so far this year in fantasy football, with no tight end outside Travis Kelce really establishing themselves as a consistent point getter. Except for Zach Ertz, who has had more 10-point games than most tight ends so far this year. They're starting to use him in that offense of Arizona. He's been used a lot on the goal line and in the red zone. I really think Zach Ertz has a lot of things going for him. Plus, this week they're going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, a team where Zach Ertz was a Pro Bowler and a Super Bowl champion with. It's a revenge game. So for those reasons, give me Zach Ertz this week.
A bit of a revenge game for Ertz. Ertz really thriving in the red zone, as you mentioned, and until DeAndre Hopkins comes back, he has proven that that is his role. He is the red zone guy for the Cardinals. Zach Ertz has looked the part, as you mentioned, 10-plus points in all 4 of his first games. Not many tight ends could say that. He has looked very good, and as long as Hopkins is out, I think he will continue to do so. Now, going back to the wide receiver room, my last guy I want you to start is Devonta Smith. Smith has had an massive increase in his role in this offense this season. He already has 27 targets through just the 4 games. That target share is absolutely unbelievable. Jalen Hurts has made it clear he loves throwing the ball his way. Devonta Smith is trusted by both the offense and the coaching staff. Smith is a guy who has done a lot of good already, and I think he will get back to that Week 2 and Week 3 form here in Week 5. Now we're going to move to the other side of things. We were in the green. We're going to move to the red. Tristan, 3 players each. Who's the number 1 player that needs to stay out of players' lineups this week?
Well, I think last week Geno Smith went absolutely nuclear against the Detroit Lions. I don't think that'll happen this week for a few reasons. First of all, that Seahawks receiving room is solid. You have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Those are both solid options, but the Saints secondary has been good so far this season. They've only allowed about 16 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks so far this year, and I really think that trend will continue, and you won't get the 30 points that you're getting from Geno Smith last week. Plus, the Superdome is a tough place to play for quarterbacks that aren't as experienced in the starter role. Geno Smith, been around the league a long time, not very long as a starter. Again, I think the Superdome could come in to be a hindrance to the Seattle Seahawks this week.
Tristan, I think we're both going to start with quarterbacks here. A guy that I would stay away from in all of your leagues, not only for starting, but maybe even for your roster at this point, is Kirk Cousins. The Vikings have really committed to winning ugly. This new regime doesn't care how they're going to do it. They just want to win, and that's what football essentially is at this point, Tristan. But that does not help you as a fantasy manager. Kirk Cousins, no games so far this season with more than 2 touchdowns. The Vikings have yet to have a game this season with more than 28 points. Until Kirk Cousins does something, anything to show me that he deserves to be in my starting lineup in a 1-quarterback league, he will not be gracing that spot. And honestly, I could even make the argument that maybe he should be dropped.
It's a possibility. I think Kirk Cousins is always a guy that gets a lot of hate, maybe unnecessarily around the league. But so far this season, with the winning ugly, I definitely see your point there. In terms of running back for me, in terms of my sit, I'm going to go Michael Carter, running back of the New York Jets, and not for the reason I think Michael Carter is a bad player. I don't. I think that Breece Hall has really established himself as the RB1 in that backfield in New York, so I think Michael Carter's touches will go down. He's had 2 stinker games in a row, and really I think that's the reason that you're going to put Michael Carter not in your starting lineup this week. If you need to use him, maybe put him as a flex. Hope he has a touchdown, but really, I'd put Michael Carter on my bench if I was a Michael Carter fantasy owner.
Tristan, I've watched every snap of New York Jets football this year, and you're absolutely right. Breece Hall is taking over that backfield game by game, albeit he has been limited in practice this week, so that's definitely something to watch as we get closer to Sunday. If he's ruled out or if he's going to have a limited role, I'm sure I speak for you when I say that would change. Michael Carter would obviously be vaulted into that starting lineup, but if Breece Hall is playing and he's playing healthy, Michael Carter's role has gone lower, and rightfully so, because Breece Hall has made the most of his touches with 4.7 yards per carry so far this season. Now, another player that I want to bench, I'm going to go back to Carolina. Baker Mayfield has not played well, and that has really rubbed off on wide receiver DJ Moore. Moore has all the makings of a wide receiver 1, but this Carolina Panthers front office has failed him as a wide receiver. He has never had a true QB1 there with him. He's completely underperformed his ADP every single year so far. He gets drafted so highly because he has those games. He shows those flashes, and he is a great NFL wide receiver, and I don't think any fan's going to deny that. But in fantasy football, that's not what you're looking for. You're not looking for who can run the best route, who's going to create the most separation. You're looking for who's going to score you points. DJ Moore has yet to do so this season. He barely did so last season. I think as long as Baker Mayfield's at the helm, and I think that that's probably the way it's going to be for an extended period of time. Sam Darnold still out for a multitude of weeks. Matt Corral out for the season. DJ Moore's a guy, if you could sell him for anything, get him off your roster.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a desperation wide receiver. If your fantasy football team's been struck with injuries, like mine has, I'd be interested in DJ Moore just for the boomer bust potential. And my final player that I would say stay away from is Julio Jones. Again, I talked about revenge games with Zach Ertz. I don't think this is one where you start Julio Jones going up against the Falcons, where he pretty much cemented his legacy as a Hall of Fame wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons. But in that offense, Tom Brady has so many other people to throw to. You have Mike Evans, you have Chris Godwin, and you have Russell Gage. Julio Jones, I don't know if he really fits there. He's coming off of an injury, and granted, he may be on a limited snap count in terms of his injury comeback, but really I just think there are so many other great wide receivers in that Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver room. There's just not enough touches to go around.
Tristan, I think what you said there is really, really solid. You're just not sure. We have to wait to see what Julio Jones' role is in this offense with players starting to get healthy, Chris Godwin coming back, him coming back, before we can put him in the lineup. I think that Julio Jones needs to show consistency. He needs to carve out a role in that Tampa Bay offense. And if that's something he's able to do, maybe he's on the other side of this video just a few weeks from now. But as for now, I agree. He's got to sit on the bench. And our final sit of the segment, I'm going to go back to the running back position. And I'm going to go over to Kansas City. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, coming off of a huge week. Career-high 19 touches. But that's not the kind of football the Chiefs play. That is a deceiving number. He got a lot of those in garbage time. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a guy who really just racked up those stats at the end of last game. And as rookie Isaiah Pacheco continues to carve out a role, I mean, Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy, they love to tell you how much they love the guy, how much they want to feed him the ball. I just don't see Clyde Edwards-Helaire being able to do what he did to start off this season. I think it slowly is on a downward trend, and I think that continues. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a guy who, if possible, I mean, don't get me wrong, running backs are few and hard to come by, but if you're able to sit him, I think that this is one of those weeks where you're going to want to keep him on your bench.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's a very smart play there.
And those were your starts and sits. That was the HB Toss. I'm your host, AJ Swiatek, joined by Tristan Fluhr. Tristan, it was a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. And I really look forward to what this show has become. Only the second week for Week 5 of the NFL. We'll be back next week for Week 6. Please let us know if there's anything you would like to see added. Drop it below. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Facebook, you name it. You'll find it there. Brought to you by SportsLink, the creative storytellers from Muncie, Indiana. The HB Toss is signing off.